As always, it is my pleasure that you join me for today's podcast of Second Chance Coaching. My name is Dr. Richard Lewis. If you'd be so kind as to leave me a rating and your feedback, I would very much appreciate it, and it will help others like you to optimally discover this podcast wherever you listen to this and your other favorite podcast. As you know, at Second Chance Coaching, we focus on seeing everyday life through the eyes of the returning citizen and highlighting the resiliency of the human spirit. I would love to work with you one-on-one, whether you're a returning citizen or coaching client seeking your second chance, or you're a representative of a business, college, or university seeking to integrate and support returning citizens in your respective organizational and learning environments. Please feel free to contact me via email at richard@secondchancecoaching.com or via Instagram at @the_Richard_Lewis. Welcome again to another edition of Second Chance Coaching. As always, it is my pleasure to join you on another week of your reentry journey from whichever corner of the world you're listening from. We always remain humbled and excited that you decided to spend part of your week with us. I apologize for us coming out late this week, as it has been one of those weeks. But then I keep thinking to myself, when is it not one of those weeks? Because every week has its own special flavor. But yesterday, I had to go through a second municipal inspection with my water heater, and this time it passed after I had to have my water heater hardwired to its electrical source. And before that, I was getting into arguments with the plumbing company as to whether they told me that the hardwiring had to be done before the first inspection failed. So I was getting them to try to pay for that because they didn't do what they were supposed to do. But you know how that goes when you try to fight City Hall. In addition, I had to physically go this week to Florida Memorial University, and because I was having so much issues with access to my Office 365, access with my classes, access to my email, which was challenging to me and my students to be able to get their assignments done and to be in contact with me. But thank goodness that got resolved as well. But as far as this podcast goes, we've completed our migration to YouTube Music, so you can now listen to us on YouTube Music, which was a little bit of a process. You know, I'm learning how to work YouTube Music, and it's my hope that in the future we could also upload videos on YouTube as part of this podcast journey. I think that'd be another way to kind of really reach out to a lot of you guys. But I would think I'd have to stop being a one-man show to effectively make that happen. You know, but who knows? You know, we'll expand at some point. On a personal note, I was also getting caught up with watching the New York Yankees being in the World Series for the first time in 15 years. And despite stretching it to 5 games, my Yankees eventually lost to the Los Angeles Dodgers. Although, you know, I never like seeing my team lose, I definitely tip my cap to the Dodgers and congratulate them and their fans on winning the World Championship and a well-played World Series. When it comes to the teaching spaces, you know, I'm teaching right now. I'm officially teaching at 5 different institutions, and we're at the point where all 5 of them are at the 5-week countdown left in the semester. We only have 5 weeks left in the fall term, and this time is going by really, really quickly. Even as we speak, the time is going by quick. You know, there are exams to be taken, assignments to be completed, projects to be done, and at this time of year, at this time of the term, is what all of us educators will hear more than anything: 2 major things. First, there'll be numerous requests for extra credit work. And second, will be the numerous stories that all of us will hear to elicit heavy levels of sympathy, to extend assignments, excuse class attendance, provide extra assistance to assignments, and all points in between, which not surprisingly will include students just asking you to give them a grade in which they may not have completely earned. Now, this past week, when I was meeting with one of my speech communication classes, we were in the midst of trying to conclude our persuasive speeches, and all the other classes were around the same place and doing the same thing. And throughout the class, you know, when I was calling on people to do their speeches next, there was a lot of hesitation in them to complete the speeches. Those who got up there was naturally mistakes in completing the speeches, which is okay. It's part of the learning process. And then there were excuses for those who did not complete the speeches, even though they knew that that day was the day to complete them. In addition, there were a number of students who just decided to be absent, decided not to come to class. The absences, in addition to them individually not being able to complete their speeches, there for our final project because the students are broken up into groups. And then even with the ones that were there were excuses and challenges being echoed by the students in that very day. I finally decided in all of the discussions happening that day that we certainly needed to have a come to the truth moment. And I asked the students specifically about what indeed was going on. There was a long period of awkward silence. And then, because that awkward silence was being a little bit too prolonged, I just felt my resolution was just to dismiss the students for the day and basically, maybe we'll live to fight another day. We'll regroup for our next class meeting. When I made that decision to say, okay, let's dismiss the students, at that moment, one of the older students in the class started to speak for what seemed to be like not only herself, but for the entire class, and stated that the class started off really great at the beginning of the semester, a semester which was positive for them. Now, that we're in the home stretch, it's a class that has not had much. There's not much positive energy for them. They don't feel it because she had said, even though they felt it was justified for me to give them constructive feedback, they felt I was being overly constructive and overly critical and not being encouraging enough. I did think there could have been some truth to that because even though I always give a mix of complimentary and constructive feedback, I know the visible frustration on my face, you know, was apparent because I was definitely getting frustrated with their performances, coupled with, all the hearing of the numerous quote unquote family problems, quote unquote relatives being sick, quote unquote chronic headaches, quote unquote having to be at the bedside of my family member, quote unquote, it's just Tuesday. All of those excuses after a while had taken its toll on me. Now, I'm not saying that these issues that the students were having weren't real. I'm not saying that. They were probably legit. Maybe they were legitimate. Maybe they were true. Maybe they weren't true. Who knows? You really can't tell. But as educators, we have run into situations where these excuses at the same time are simply delay tactics or ways to completely excuse the student from the requirements of the course. At that moment, in the midst of all those interactions, I recognized in myself that I was experiencing what many in the medical community call compassion fatigue. According to the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, compassion fatigue is the cost of caring for and or helping others through their emotional needs or pain which results from the desire to help relieve the discomfort and suffering of others. This definition originally came from those working in the medical profession, but it's certainly been expanded to those of us who are in the helping professions. This could also be known as vicarious or secondary trauma, referring to how someone else's trauma can become your own. Now, this might sound similar to, people being burnt out, but it's really not that. Being burnt out is a psychological condition, according to the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, of emotional exhaustion and reduced accomplishment, which is the result of prolonged stress. You know, Once again, burnout and compassion fatigue has occurred in many helping professions. It originated in the medical industry, and it still exists in professions such as medicine, also in social work, counseling, and education. A lot of helping professions, nonprofits, just to name a few. Compassion fatigue could happen even more rapidly than burnout. It could catch up to you very quickly. Even when I spoke to my own daughter, when she talked to me about her working in nonprofit, I could hear in her voice the compassion fatigue. And she sat there and spoke to how that was a little exhausting. But I could tell, she's young, still has a lot of energy, to sit there and help her clients. And that was such an encouraging thing to hear. But whether I'm feeling compassion fatigue or you're feeling compassion fatigue or someone you could feel that when you're feeling any of the following. Number one, if you have feelings of helplessness and powerlessness in the face of a client or a patient suffering, you have reduced feelings of empathy and sensitivity. That happened to me. or feeling overwhelmed and exhausted by work demands. Certainly that has happened to me. Feeling detached, numb, and emotionally disconnected. Sometimes that's happened to me as well. The loss of interest in activities that you used to enjoy. That could sneak up on you. Being threatened while providing care. That's not always happened to me, but there's times that it has happened to me in the educational environment. Or, in a nonprofit, especially when you're working with folks in reentry or working in a hospital. I mean, so there's nothing that's really unique to this, but also working in dangerous environments, could be the onset, could spark compassion fatigue. And when you have compassion fatigue, it could lead to some of the following psychological and physical symptoms, that one could have that could say that compassion fatigue is very present. One could have insomnia, they could have nausea, they could suffer from dizziness, drastic shifts in one's mood. That I've experienced as well. Becoming overly irritable or quick to anger. That's happened to me. I know that's happened to a lot of folks I know. Reduced ability to feel sympathy and empathy. That has happened to a lot of folks I know. That's happened to me. And believe it or not, for me, the last thing, changes in appetite. That's happened to a lot of folks I know. These feelings and symptoms, can lead to, for a lot of people, an increased use of alcohol or drugs. They could increasingly self-medicate. They could start to miss work, call out of work, have impaired decision making, or really sometimes, ultimately, they can make the decision to leave the profession altogether. And when it comes to leaving the profession altogether, I could say, unfortunately, there's not a week that goes by in which I'm not trying to convince teachers to stay in the profession, or individuals who are in the criminal justice reentry space to stay in the profession, and in both instances show their talents and be of value, and be a beacon of light to those who need them, the ones that they're making a difference for. Sometimes I'm successful in talking them off the ledge and being able to get them to stay. And there are a lot of times in which I'm not. I'm not able to get them to stay. There's some folks who stay, and there are numerous individuals who have left and have never returned to these careers. There are times in which I had to speak myself about not leaving the educational space. When a lot of times when people are faced with, I mean, now I'm talking about education and criminal justice reentry specifically. When you're faced with the everyday stressors in these environments, every day these environments definitely have different stressors and triggers. In addition to, in both cases, you're dealing with legislation, sometimes national, a lot of it local legislation and state legislation that fights you, that really fights you a lot in both arenas, and it's exhausting. And that legislation, honestly, has put people, especially educators, has put educators in the position of being vilified as an educator, being vilified as an advocate. When you're being vilified as far as you doing your job and doing your job with great intention, it's difficult to stay encouraged. And it's difficult for you to stay encouraged for yourself. And if you can't be encouraged, it's difficult to be an encouragement to others. Now, going back to that discussion in my speech communication class, when the students finished having their piece, they said their piece, it was my turn to say my piece as well. And I gave them my perspective on primarily what I saw in them. And I felt like a lot of them were just not putting their effort in, and they were wasting their talents and wasting their opportunities to be excellent, not only in this class, but to get skills that they could use for other classes and to use in their professional careers, not really seeing how being an effective speech communicator could be so effective and such a skill that could translate into so many different areas of their lives. I did remind them as to, when I did encourage them, including that day, but recognized that, if I get visibly frustrated or you hear it in my voice, it could really mute out any balance of encouragement I was expressing. And also telling them the honest truth, because, a lot of times people don't want to hear the honest truth. So I had to tell them the honest truth. I said to them that this is a world in which the priority is not to encourage you. You'll have to fight through those challenges. I've had to say that to reentry clients as well. You have to fight through challenges. You have to fight through discouragement. You have to fight through frustration. You have to fight through all kinds of things that seem to be designed to fight against you. And sometimes, whether you're a student or whether you're a reentry client or whatever the case may be, sometimes the only voice of strength, determination, and faith will be your very own. And I've been there, and that has happened to me. So even after giving them that kick in the pants response, I reminded them that my door remains open to all of them for whatever assistance I could provide in my role, that I'll always be there to help them with that. Now, when the class was over, I knew I needed some much needed fresh air because there was a lot going on, during this week. There was a lot going on with work, a lot going on with that water heater, challenges at Florida Memorial. I've not been getting enough sleep this week. It was a week in which I looked to the heavens and I said, I was hoping for the wisdom and comfort of my mother. I said, oh, if I could just have a conversation with mom for a few minutes, I know that she would guide me appropriately. But in those moments, I also thought about what my cousin said to me. One of my cousins said to me when she passed. She gave me everything that I needed. I just had to tap into that. But thank goodness, where I live here in Florida, we live in a state where the weather is warm and pleasant most of the year. And I actually literally and figuratively sought that fresh air. That coping strategy or strategies to combat my compassion fatigue and in combination, to combat my compassion fatigue really worked to just get that fresh air. But also, too, I was looking at British Columbia's Compass mental health program, which provides you and I, with numerous tips to help us to manage and alleviate our bouts that we have with compassion fatigue. A lot of things that they wrote. It was about 11 of them I was able to get out of them. Number one, they were said to practice mindfulness throughout the day by being really aware of your thoughts and feelings and even physical sensations or physical feelings. One of my podcast colleagues, and I consider a good friend on social media, Dr. Darren Wilson, when he was doing life coaching for men, he even talked about, when you feel a certain thing, how do you physically feel at that moment to identify that feeling with what it is that you're going through. Number two, when you start to feel anxious, calm yourself down by really concentrating on your breathing in your nose, out your mouth. Reach out to others for support. Definitely, I didn't have a problem doing that. Set aside time for meaningful activity and find ways to connect with loved ones. Got to find a way to do that more. Number five, establish a good self-care routine that includes eating healthy, getting more exercise, and getting more sleep. All three of those I have to do more of. Number six, set boundaries and limits on the demands of life and the demands that others put on you. Set boundaries and limits. Say, listen, reclaim my time. You can't cross this place. Number seven, work on your life outside of your role as a caregiver, an educator, or a coach. Work on the areas of your life that's going to work well for you. That you don't have to be all things to everyone. Number eight, establish routines to separate work from your personal time. Very important. Number nine, be patient with yourself and ask others to be patient with you. I know there are folks right now who are listening on the podcast that I owe phone calls to. I am so sorry. I am going to make those phone calls. I'm going to return your phone calls. Believe me, I think about you every day. I miss you guys. I will be in touch. Number 10, to the extent that you possibly can, make work an enjoyable place, even in small ways. And number 11, this wasn't in the Compass Mental Health Program, but this is the wisdom from my mom. And I imagine many of your moms. It's an added point that mom would always tell my sister and I. She would tell her grandchildren as well. She would say, stop, be still, be quiet. And in that moment, open your heart and your mind and pray. All you got to do is pray. So before we sign off this week, I want to thank our listeners in our top 3 states in the United States of America this week. And that it continues to be the state of Delaware, our home state here in Florida, and the state of Virginia. I also want to thank, as always, for our podcast, for the love of our podcast, from our international family in Brazil, Canada, Bangladesh, United Kingdom, India, and Australia. Last but not least, I want to congratulate. I talked about my daughter, possibly experiencing compassion fatigue. I want to congratulate her. She started a new job in the last few weeks. So she did her good work at Daughters Beyond Incarceration. So she's left that organization and the good work that they're doing over there. And now she has a new job. And she seems to be loving it. She's still in the helping profession a lot and is doing well with it. And certainly I want to most of all, I want to recognize that on the day that I'm recording this podcast, and this podcast is coming out on a Friday, tomorrow, Saturday, November 2nd, my little girl will have a milestone birthday and will be turning 30 years old. Happy, happy birthday to my outstanding, beautiful, and phenomenal daughter. 30 years old. Wow. When I think of that, her turning 30, I think of the fact, and I'm speaking here to you, Julian, I think of the fact that your meme, my mother, was 30 years old when she had me. And I look at how you've grown into an outstanding woman and a fantastic mother. You carry so many of the selfless traits that made your meme and your granny, your mother's mother, very special women. And how proud I am of you to see how you are walking into their greatness while carving out your original path. I love you, baby girl, and most of all, happy, happy, blessed birthday to you. I want to thank all of you, as always, for sharing your time with me. Thank you for continuing to spread second chance coaching to your friends, family, and loved ones. Thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to spending time with you again next week. And we will be on time next week. We will be on time, and we'll put out our next episode on Wednesday. But between now and Wednesday is Election Day in the United States on Tuesday. Do not forget to vote. Do not forget to vote. Thank you again. I look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you again for joining us here at Second Chance Coaching. In addition to coaching services for individuals and businesses, I'm also available for speaking engagements and workshops on criminal justice reentry, human resources, as well as organizational culture and leadership. Feel free to email me at richard@secondchancecoaching.com, as well as connect with me on Instagram at @DrRichardLewis. Remember, every day you are given this opportunity for your second chance, and I know you'll make the best of it. I love you all, and I look forward to connecting with you next time here at Second Chance Coaching.